First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Thanks to the Canadian Network on Cuba for the support and the solidarity movement in Canada and in other parts of the world for the support of Cuba in the struggle against the blockade and for the exclusion of Cuba of the terrorist list. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here and to give us some words to our guests. I want to begin saying that on October 6th, remember the facts. On October 6th of 1976, Cubana regular flight 455 had started in Guyana. After a stopover in Trinidad and Tobago, the DC-8 plane arrived in Barbados with the aim of continuing towards Jamaica and finally to Havana. That day, the flight was interrupted. 9 minutes after takeoff from Barbados International Airport, the plane would drop into the sea, victim of the explosion in tandem of 2 terrorist bombs. The life of all 73 passengers and crew on board, national of Cuba, Guyana, and Korea were lost. To this day, Cuba cries for the lives lost in this abominable terrorist act and also continues to cry for all those victims of terrorism, both in Cuba and abroad. Today, we are also commemorating the first anniversary of the CARICOM Cuba Day Against Terrorism, declared during the 8th CARICOM Cuba Summit held in Barbados in December of 2022. We cannot forget that during the first decades of the Cuban Revolution, my country was victim of multiple terrorist attacks against embassies and diplomatic personnel, and against facilities in Cuba, many of which were organized from countries in Latin America and Caribbean. Now, our region has demonstrated its commitment as a song of peace and to work with the international community in the fight against terrorism in accordance with international law and conventions, and to ensure that our territories are not used in any manner to facilitate the activities of terrorists or to undermine the regional security. However, unfortunately, acts of this type continue happening. In the last 3 years, the Cuban embassy in Washington, D.C. has been victim of 2 terrorist attacks for which justice has not yet been done. Besides, the inclusion of Cuba in the list of countries alleged to sponsor terrorism generates several consequences to Cuba's economy, mainly in the banking financial sector, while reinforcing the deterrent and intimidating effects toward third parties in their commercial relations with Cuba. Its impact is extremely detrimental to obtaining credit and making payments for goods and supplies essential for the development of the country. Due to its classification as a state sponsor of terrorism, numerous companies and financial entities around the world have refused to operate with Cuba for fear of retaliation from the United States government, specifically the Treasury Department. Dozens of banks suspended their operation with the country, including transfer for the purchase of food, medicine, food, materials, parts, and other goods. Likewise, dozens of Cuban diplomatic missions in the world have lost their relationship with the banks that traditionally provide them with services due to their fear of retaliation from the United States government. Since 2019, yes, the blockade has escalated more harmful and in human dimension. In the context of the global crisis in the health, energy, food, and environmental sectors, Cuba has additionally had to face the unprecedented tightening of the US blockade, which includes very aggressive measures imposed during the government of Donald Trump, and which, for the most part, still remain in force as a continuation of the US policy of maximum pressure against my country. The possibility of taking action in US courts against lawsuits filed under Title III of the Helms-Burton Act, the permanence of Cuba in the arbitrary list of state sponsors of terrorism prepared by the United States Department of State, the persecution of the country's financial and commercial transactions, the impossibility of processing non-immigrant visas in Havana, intimidation of companies that send fuel supplies to the island, attempts to frustrate the recovery of the tourism sector after the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID pandemic and the discredit campaign against Cuban medical cooperation programs define the most severe country features of the hostile policy of the United States towards Cuba. The intensification of the blockade has been accompanied by an increase in political, media, and communication aggression, as well as an increase in disinformation in operations financed with federal funds from the United States budget. The effort to generate material deficiencies, shortages, show discouragement, dissatisfaction, and cause damage to the Cuban people persists, as well as hinder the possibilities of economic progress in a scenario of serious global crisis, exacerbated by the socioeconomic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. While COVID-19 claimed millions of lives around the world and strained the condition of the Cuban health system, the United States government did not apply a single blockade relief measure. Instead, this inhuman policy intensified and generated difficulties and delays in the arrival of essential medical supplies and equipment, including for the industrialization and Cuban vaccines. The acquisition of the medical oxygen and in third countries and the supply of lung ventilators were even hindered. The blockade constitutes a massive, flagrant, and systematic violation of the human rights of Cuban men and women. It represents the most unfair, severe, and prolonged system of unilateral coercive measures that has been applied against any country, and continues to be the main obstacles to the development of all the potential of the Cuban economy, to the implementation of the national economic and social development plan of the country, and as well as for the achievement of the 2030 agenda and its sustainable development goals. The President of the United States could make use of his broad powers if there was the will to alleviate the damage caused by the blockade to the Cuban people and the willingness to overcome the greatest obstacles to Cuba's economy, commercial, and financial relations with the United States and the rest of the world, as well as for the well-being of the Cuban people. Thank you so much.